Hello class, this video segment will deal with the French Revolution and the causes of the French Revolution when we look at French society during the old regime, as well as the initial stages of revolution and rebellion and how did the king respond to this, and as well as the consequences of his response. Some terms that you should be able to talk about and to explain, discuss after viewing these videos. The old regime, the estate system. There's three estates, and you need to know which group or groups of people are included in each estate. Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette, the king and queen of France at this time, and the roles that they played in the beginnings of the French Revolution. The Estates General, what was it, and what actions did it take in the early stages of revolution? The National Assembly and the Tennis Court Oath. Who made up the National Assembly? What was the Tennis Court Oath, and what role did it play in these early stages of revolution? And then finally, the Great Fear. What caused the Great Fear? What was the Great Fear? And how did the Great Fear foreshadow some of the future problems or actions of the French Revolution? All right, so looking at the old order, looking at French society, how it was made up in the years leading up to the French Revolution. And so in the early 1700s, France was the leading country of Europe. It was the center of the new ideas of the Enlightenment. If you remember, Voltaire was French, Rousseau was French, Montesquieu was French. The spread of Enlightenment ideas happened in French salons. So everyone really looked towards the French for, for the model of these new ideas of liberty, equality, and justice. However, even if the French were the model or the center of Enlightenment ideas, there were still some major problems that would soon cause a violent revolution in France. And this had to deal with the old regime or the makeup of French society in the years before the revolution. The old regime was created or consisted of three estates or three groups of social classes. The first estate, which counted as about 1% of the French population. This was the Roman Catholic Church and the clergy. The second estate, which was the nobility. They consisted of about 2% of the French population. And then last but not least, the third estate. The third estate consisted of 97% of the French population, and it also had three groups lumped into this. The bourgeoisie, which we'll discuss a little bit later, the artisans and the city workers, and then finally the peasants. And we'll look at some of these problems that the third estate had with the old regime or the old order. So the first question on this PowerPoint slide was, how was French society unequal? And how did this inequality help cause or bring about the French Revolution? So the old regime was not equal in the sense that the tax system placed an unfair burden on the third estate. We talked about how the first estate, the Roman Catholic Church, owned about 10% of the land. 1% of the population owned about 10% of all the land out there in France. However, it only paid about 2% of its income or of its revenues in taxes. And these weren't even in formal taxes to the government, but these were in services provided to the general public, such as education. They were exempt from all the other taxes that the third estate had to pay. The second estate, the nobility, owned about 20% of the total land in France. However, they were exempt from all taxes. They didn't pay any taxes to the French government. That means that the tax burden went to the third estate. Now, there's a couple of different reasons why the third estate had problems with this tax system, and it really depended on what status you held within the third estate. The bourgeoisie, these were the wealthy merchants. Maybe they were, higher ups in the French military. In some cases, they were just as wealthy, if not wealthier, than some of the French nobles. However, since they were placed in the third estate, they had to pay high taxes, just like everyone else in the third estate. And they still were, not allowed or pushed out of some certain privileges that the first and second states held. And so the bourgeoisie was the faction of the French population that really supported these ideas of the Enlightenment, such as liberty and equality, because they felt like they deserved a larger say, or they deserved more power than they had, due to their wealth and their status. So they will definitely be arguing for change in the old regime. The second group of the third estate, the city workers, they were, they had to pay or they had to shoulder the tax burden, and a lot of times, they were out of work, and if they had to pay taxes, they would end up, not having enough money to buy basic food or other necessities, and would oftentimes face, such crisis as starvation. And then finally, the peasants who have always, been at the bottom of the social order ever since the medieval times, continuing to have to face this heavy tax burden, paying half of whatever income they had to the church in the form of tithes, paying taxes to the government, and just like the city workers, anytime new taxes or prices rose, this would cause a crisis for them, and we'll come back to some of these problems later when we see some of the first stages of the French Revolution take place. So three forces of change that really led to the French Revolution. The first one was the Enlightenment, and we will talk momentarily about some of the ideas of the Enlightenment and how they were contributing cause for revolution. The second factor was the French economy. On paper, it looked strong, but there were some underlying weaknesses to the French economy that King Louis XVI is going to have to deal with. And that brings us to our third cause for revolution, King Louis XVI and his leadership or lack thereof. So we will look at each factor in a little bit more detail and how they contributed to the French Revolution. New views about power and authority in government were spreading among the Third Estate, or among members of the Third Estate. And these were ideas that were rooted in the Enlightenment. Members of the Third Estate were also inspired by the success of the American Revolution, and so they began to question long-standing notions about the structure of society. And you saw members of the Third Estate, really the bourgeoisie, like I had mentioned earlier, they began quoting people like Rousseau and Voltaire, these Enlightenment thinkers that we had discussed earlier. They began to demand equality and liberty and democracy. And there's a quote that I have here that really sums up how the Enlightenment and how the ideas and the values of the Enlightenment really inspired the Third Estate to stand up and to challenge the status quo. And the quote goes as followed. The Third Estate is the people, and the people is the foundation of the state. It is in the state, it is in fact the state itself. The people is everything. Everything should be subordinated to it. It is in the people that all national power resides, and for the people that all the states exist. And so you can see here that the Third Estate, which once again 97% of the French population, they're starting to see here that, and they're starting to outright, speak out, and state that, something's going to have to give. We cannot continue to make up such a huge portion of the French population, and not have as large of a say, and not being able to participate in the French government like the First and Second Estates do. We need to have that sense of liberty and equality and democracy. Or we can't go on. And so you will definitely see some of these values of the Enlightenment, sprout up and show themselves in the stages of the French Revolution. All right, this brings us to our next factor that led to revolution, the French economy. On paper, it looked like the French economy was sound. Production and trade were rapidly expanding. However, there were some underlying weaknesses to the French economy that were the cause for some trouble. The first one was a tax burden. The tax burden made it difficult for anyone to lead a profitable business or life in France. The second cause was the standard of living was increasing rapidly in France, making it more expensive for people to eke out a living than it once was. And then third, there was a series of crop failures and bad weather during the 1780s that caused there to be grain shortages, and this would then cause the price of such products like bread to double. And so you saw that with the tax burden, with the cost of living, and with the crop shortages, you saw that in the 1780s, many people, namely in the Third Estate, faced starvation. The French government was also heavily in debt. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, they were notorious for, this high spending to support their luxurious lifestyle. Marie Antoinette was famous for holding lavish parties, dressing in the latest fashion. Louis XVI loved to gamble and hunt, and you need money to support this lifestyle. Now they did, inherit a considerable amount of debt from past kings. They accrued a lot of debt from supporting the French Revolution. From supporting the American Revolution in the 1770s and early 1780s, in an effort to help the Americans defeat their rival, the British. However, in the 1780s, around 1786, the situation was so bad that the bankers refused to allow refused to lend the French government any money or any more money, and this put Louis XVI in a very unique situation where he's going to have to start to assert his authority over the three estates and over the Estates General in an effort to gain some revenue. And this brings us to our next factor that led to the revolution, the leadership of King Louis XVI. All right, strong leadership might have solved some of these problems. However, King Louis XVI was indecisive, and he always put off governing because it didn't interest him. He relied on Marie Antoinette for advice, which was often not the best of decisions he could have made. The French people did not like Marie Antoinette because of her lavish spending and because she was Austrian, one of the rivals or enemies of the French. And so when the French bankers didn't or refused to lend the French government any more money, Louis XVI decided that the only possible solution would be to impose a tax on the nobility or the Second Estate. However, the nobility asserted their own, authority over the king and forced him to call a meeting of the Estates General, or a meeting of all three estates together, and to vote on the tax. And this will be the first time in 175 years in which the Estates General will be called together for a meeting in which the king will ask for their say in deciding the matter of taxation on the Second Estate. And in May of 1789, the three estates will converge onto Versailles, the Versailles Palace where the king resides. They will go to Versailles decide to vote on this tax of this, on whether or not the second state needs to pay this tax. And this will start to lead pretty quickly, in fact, start to lead to the series of events that will cause the French Revolution to occur. Look to our next videos or series of videos that explain some of these early events of the French Revolution, what caused them, and what happened as a result.